bbc.com/reality check.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Amrodiwala. On today's Global, the devastating volcanic eruption and tsunami that's hit Tonga. A huge ash cloud has engulfed the Pacific Islands. One official said the island nation looks like a moonscape. The volcano erupted underwater. Satellite images suggest some areas have been completely submerged. The shockwaves were so powerful they were felt from Tonga right through to the US. With communications cut off, we'll hear live from UNICEF to try to find out what is happening on the ground. Also on the programme, all out of credit. One of the world's top bankers resigns for breaking COVID rules. We'll find out what it means for Credit Suisse. And we'll be live in Cameroon as the Africa Cup of Nations heads into the second week, the sharp end of the competition with the knockout stages. Welcome back to the programme. Let's return straight away to the major volcanic eruption and tsunami that's hit Tonga. The scale of destruction still remains unclear, with communications knocked out, but satellite imagery shows significant areas are now submerged. The volcano erupted underwater on Saturday, triggering waves of over a metre high. International efforts to deliver aid have been gathering pace as further information comes in from damage assessment teams sent by Australia and New Zealand. There's been significant damage to several islands and there are reports of missing people. Well, Anna Jane Langi is a Tongan University student studying in neighbouring Fiji. We spoke to her earlier and asked her if she'd heard from her family in Tonga.
One of the descriptions that had come was that you could sink almost your whole hand into how thick the layer of ash is. And so everyone has to wear masks to keep safe because the air is not good. The water systems are contaminated, so everyone has to stock up on water, which is not something they would normally do since we collect and boil rainwater. As well as the vulnerable groups and just people whose houses were ruined because the western side of the island was heavily damaged. So that's a few of the pressing issues for now. There has yet to be a full assessment of the whole island, and not just the main island, but the outer islands as well. But I would have to say that everyone is affected, even if, let's say, the water didn't reach where they're staying, just the environment they're in right now, even though there are no reported casualties yet, just because we can mark them safe, they're not particularly in a safe environment at the moment.
Well, let's talk now to Daniel Walden, who's Head of Emergencies with UNICEF. He's here in London, but joins us on the programme. Daniel, welcome. I wonder if you could start by telling me, have you been able to reach any of your people on the ground or in the region itself?
Yes, so our teams, thanks for having us. Our teams in the region are telling us it's been possibly the biggest eruption in the last 30 years or so. And as we just heard, it's not just about the immediate damage from the tsunami. We're also looking at the huge impact of the ash cloud. The guys there have said that essentially we're looking at damaged food and water supplies as a result of the ash cloud, but also the air quality is really questionable. So we're looking at that as well. As we've just heard, we're waiting to hear from surveillance operations by Australia and New Zealand to the full extent of the damage, and obviously we're waiting for a big old green light from the government in Tonga to get on and release some of those supplies that we've got ready to go.
Yes, you were talking about the ash cloud, and as you were speaking, we have some of the latest pictures. It is just vast, and we were hearing reports it goes up as far as 30 kilometres high. I mean, it is absolutely massive. The Red Cross was saying 80,000 people potentially on the islands may have been affected. How worried, first of all, are you?
So this is a really, really serious situation for us. Fortunately, we've got pre-positioned supplies in Fiji and in Brisbane in Australia, ready to go. Usually in this kind of a situation, and we're expecting in this situation in particular, the priorities in the next days are going to be clean water for everybody and sustaining access to healthcare. Obviously, we're still in a situation of COVID-19 globally, and getting people into places is a really tough one. So it's making sure that we work with people we're already friendly with on the island and get those supplies to the people that need them as soon as possible, just as soon as we get a green light from the government.
Yes, you were talking about clean water. That's exactly what we heard from our Tongan student who was making the point that so many people collect natural rainwater, use that for drinking, and that will all be contaminated potentially by the dust and the ash. What else do you have to actually have readied? Because potentially there may be many people who've had homes swept away.
Yes, exactly. So the pre-positioned supplies that we have in place at the moment, they include straightforward buckets and water testing kits to make sure that any water that is retained on the island is safe to drink. But we also have water and sanitation kits, which include purification tablets, making water safe to drink. On top of that, we've got tarpaulins and tents and temporary shelter for homes, but also for schools and health centres if institutions like that, really valuable institutions, have been damaged by the tsunami.
How difficult is it to coordinate things? Because we know the main cable has been cut that runs under the ocean, and that is really proving problematic for communications, and that could be out for what, a couple of weeks. Are your satellite phones working? I mean, how are you able to ascertain more of the facts, the data that are going to be so crucial in determining what you actually do?
It really is a work in progress at this point in time. We do have satellite phones, but they're working intermittently, and there is a real lack of internet connectivity as a result of that damaged cable under the sea. So it's a case of doing the best we can with what we've got, and using those satellite phones when they're working.
Well, there we will leave it. But thanks so much for coming on the programme and just taking us through what you are grappling with as, of course, you try to get help to those people in Tonga. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks very much.
Now, let us pause and catch up with business. A busy day because Ben is here with a big COVID resignation in the world of banking. Ben, tell us more.
Yeah, more fallout, Matthew, from those COVID rules and people who have not been following them. News today that the world's top bankers, or one of them, has run into similar problems to prime ministers and sports stars. He is Antonio Horta Azario, and he's resigned from the Swiss giant Credit Suisse for breaking COVID travel rules, including by travelling to the UK to go to the Wimbledon Tennis Championship. Well, the Portuguese banker said that he regretted the personal action and how that compromised his ability to represent the bank. Well, the new chairman, Axel Lehmann, says the bank will stick to the plan that his predecessor was overseeing to deal with a string of problems at Credit Suisse. Well, our business editor, Simon Jack, has been explaining the circumstances of the resignation.
Antonio Horta Azario was found to have breached COVID rules on a couple of occasions, eye-catchingly, as you've mentioned, by attending the Wimbledon tennis finals. He travelled from Switzerland, which was then on the UK's amber list, which meant that he should have been in self-isolation or quarantine for that period. Now, his people say that he thought he was in possession of an exemption, which was in place at that time for senior business leaders to come and go and conduct business. France introduced one and the UK followed suit, but it transpires that the paperwork he needed to do that wasn't in place, and there's a question mark over whether that exemption would have applied to attending a sports event. He's also thought to have flown in and out of Switzerland in a time frame that wasn't permitted by Swiss rules. So, as you say, he's paid for these indiscretions, for which he accepts. There's no dispute on his part that he did break these rules. He takes full responsibility. The people close to him were hoping perhaps that he could get away with a censure, but as you say, he's leaving with immediate effect to be replaced by a UBS executive, Credit Suisse's big rival, effective immediately.
Yes, and we know now the new boss, Axel Lehmann, it will be the new chairman. What sort of job does he inherit? What will he have to do to steady the ship at Credit Suisse?
Well, I think to really, in a way, do what Antonio Horta Azario was hired to do, which is try and keep Credit Suisse out of the headlines. You had the Greensill Capital scandal where investors there lost billions of pounds. A hedge fund to which the bank itself had lent a lot of money collapsed. And there was this very odd internal spying scandal. All of that had really damaged the reputation of it. And if you look at Credit Suisse's share price, it's down about a quarter since this time last year, while its rival UBS has seen its shares go up 30%. So a massive difference in valuation. Having said that, the new boss, the new chairman, Lehman, says that he will continue with the strategy formulated by Antonio Horto Azario. And the hope is that if things like interest rates begin to rise, generally a good thing for banks. There's lots of mergers going on. There's money to be made in those markets. If Credit Suisse can keep its nose clean, then hopefully it can put this period behind it and do better.
That's our business editor Simon Jack speaking to me there. Now to China, where its president Xi Jinping has called on world leaders to do more to tackle supply chain problems and the inflation shocks that they've caused. Well, speaking at a virtual version of the World Economic Forum, he said the world's second biggest economy remained fundamentally strong. Now, he was speaking on a day when the latest official numbers show that the economy grew by 8.1% last year. But it did slow towards the end of the year amid new coronavirus outbreaks. Here's a little bit of what President Xi had to say.
In the context of the ongoing COVID-19 response, the world needs to explore new drivers of economic growth, new modes of social life, and new pathways for people-to-people exchanges. This is in a bid to facilitate cross-border trade, keep industrial and supply chains secure and functioning smoothly, and also promote steady and solid progress in the global economic recovery.
So President Xi asking for a global response, but how likely is it that countries can actually coordinate what they do to help solve supply chain problems, highlighted there by President Xi? It is a question that I put to Jeffrey Yu a little earlier. He's a market strategist at the investment banking firm Bank of New York Mellon.
It's going to be tricky at this point. Different countries, depending on which part of the supply chain you belong to, finished goods, intermediate goods, etc., they all have the different issues. And right now, we just have to also face up to the reality that globally, until the pandemic is dealt with, there could be supply issues everywhere where there's production. We are seeing issues with imports globally and China of late as well. And that's just something that we'll have to live with for some time. But most central banks think that last year and early this year, we may have seen the peak. So hopefully it's going to be better from now on.
And particularly if we look at something like manufacturing in China right now, many countries around the world are sort of learning to live with the virus. They're getting, economies are reopening, businesses able to operate. In China, to some degree, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing cities shut down, we're seeing manufacturing, we're seeing ports still shut down. And that is a very different approach to what we've seen elsewhere.
It is a different. It is a different approach, but if you look at the numbers, they're not exactly showing up in the data yet. December exports above expectations at almost 21% year on year. If anything, the concern right now perhaps is domestic demand. Due to lockdowns in various cities, that is really surprising to the downside. If you look at imports, massively slower in terms of the growth rate. So that is going to be a priority for Chinese growth up ahead. We're hearing talk of tax cuts already, and I expect more to come at the March National People's Congress when they announce economic policy.
Yes, I wanted to ask about that because we've had these latest growth figures. On the face of it, still quite good. We might start to get a sense of what any lockdowns have, and particularly if we look at the end of the year, we're starting to see that growth slow. We've seen a cut in interest rates. What else can they do?
The interest rate cut did come as a surprise, and also a release of liquidity through required reserve ratio cuts. The main focus will have to be, in one word, fiscal. We've seen how fiscal has made a difference in sustaining demand globally. That's one topic of discussion here in the UK, whether the planned rise in national insurance should be taken away or not. So for China, I do expect much stronger fiscal impulse to be announced in March or April. And actually, they've brought forward some of the debt issuance and bond issuance for local governments, suggesting they're front-loading fiscal demand and also spending already. So that certainly is what we should expect from China for this year if they want to hit their targets.
Those are your top business stories. Matthew, back to you.
Ben, thanks very much. Thank you. Now, do stay with us because still to come here on the programme, we'll be live in Cameroon for all the latest from the Africa Cup of Nations, with the hosts in action and the holders looking like they could go out.
Now from BBC Real.
Melatonin is a hormone of darkness. It starts to appear in most people's life around 8 o'clock in the evening, and then it peaks during sleep at night, and in the morning it is suppressed by the appearance of light.
lot of people can't get used to the short days or longer nights during the winter months. There's a lot of theories as to why that occurs. One of the theory is that we became desynchronized with the light-dark patterns because we don't get enough light during the day. So some people can't really adapt to that. So they start having feelings like depression, withdrawal, carbohydrate craving, weight gain. And that typically goes away during the summer months. So that's really what characterizes what we call seasonal affective disorder.
We know of studies where it appears that maybe 20 minutes of daily dosage of strong light is enough.
Original global stories from the BBC.
Welcome back to Global here on BBC World News. Our main story, aid efforts to tsunami-hit islands in Tonga have been gathering pace as further information comes in from damage assessment teams in the region. Now let's turn to the Africa Cup of Nations, which has entered its second week. It's approaching the knockout stages of the competition. Several players, though, have missed matches after testing positive for coronavirus, and most games so far have been played out in front of half-empty stadiums. Well, let's talk to BBC Sport Africa's Ian Williams, who's outside the stadium where the hosts Cameroon are taking on Cape Verde in the next little while. And Ian, welcome here to the programme. Let's start with COVID and players who've actually missed matches. We saw that with Gabon last week. Give us the latest on that.
Yeah, and some breaking news today on Gabon. The headlines there around two of their star players, Mario Lemina and particularly Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, one of the biggest names in African football, the Arsenal striker. He missed the build-up to the tournament because of COVID, and he didn't also play against Ghana in the last match, even though we expected him to. We were told he was over COVID. He tested negative. He'd been training with his teammates, and suddenly his name wasn't on the team sheet. It was breaking news then that scans had picked up what were described as heart lesions. His manager, Patrice Neveu, on the day played it down slightly, said it wasn't anything serious, long-lasting. But today, Gabon, ahead of their match with Morocco tomorrow, told us that 7 players from their squad would be out with coronavirus. 2 again, Lemina and Aubameyang. And then after that, we got another announcement saying both players would return to their clubs and would play no further part in this tournament. So a bit of a breaking story here today. I'm sure we'll get more details, but it just shows you how serious it's been and how big a problem for certain sides who've missed many of their best players, and we're going to go on seeing that, I think, as the tournament progresses.
Yes, that's quite a development. Now, one of the issues has been around half-empty stadiums. I know there's a plan underway to try to address that. Tell me what that plan is.
Yeah, a plan right from the very top. The president, Paul Biya, a communique from him over the weekend saying he was changing school hours and public sector working hours for the rest of the tournament, essentially from today all the way through to the 4th of February, which is after the semi-finals. So they will start earlier, so you can have school from 7:30 until 1 p.m. and from 7:30 until 2 p.m. for public sector workers. The idea being obviously that after they finish work or they finish school, they can go and they can watch the game. And I think you can probably see, even though we're just about half-time in this game between Cameroon and Cape Verde, there are people still coming in. I have to say, you're supposed to be checked for COVID. You know, you have to have a test, you have to prove that you're negative, you have to show that you're double vaccinated. Well, all of those testing facilities here at the Alembe Stadium seem to have shut down in the last few minutes, and people are just coming through and making their way up that ramp. You can see me towards the entrance to the stadium there. So Paul Biya obviously very keen to get people into the stadiums, as you say, to fill them up. But I've come out of the stadium here today, I would estimate around about half full, maybe if that, but with the horns and everything else that the African football fans bring with them, still making quite some noise, I can tell you.
So take us through today's matches with the hosts, as you say, in action. But I also want to ask you about the current holders of this cup. They are looking a little bit like, well, potentially they could go out, couldn't they? Tell me more about that, first of all.
Absolutely. Algeria on a knife edge after one of the biggest shocks probably in AFCON history last night. Equatorial Guinea 1, Algeria 0. Esteban Obiang with the goal in the second half. And because Algeria were also held to a really surprising goalless draw in their first game against Sierra Leone, a team who've not been at this tournament for 26 years, they only have 1 point from 2 games so far, and they had to play their hardest game, or what should have been their hardest game in the group, their final game against Ivory Coast on Thursday. So if Algeria don't win that, they will be out. So big problems for Algeria. As I say, a huge shock being beaten by Equatorial Guinea. Algeria were on a 35-match unbeaten run until last night, going back to October 2018. Today, here at the stadium, the Alembe Stadium, we have Cameroon in action against Cape Verde. Cameroon, the hosts, of course, already through to the knockout stages after back-to-back wins against Burkina Faso and Ethiopia. And they have the tournament's top scorer, Vincent Aboubakar, the captain. He scored 4 goals in his first 2 games, and he's got another one today because he's given Cameroon the lead against Cape Verde here in Yaoundé. So they look set to make it 3 from 3 perhaps, and Aboubakar absolutely running away with that golden boot, it would seem. The other game a short time ago in this group, Group A, which is finishing today in Bafoussam, and Burkina Faso were beating Ethiopia 1-0 there. So it looks as if it will be Cameroon certainly, and also Burkina Faso who will make it through to the next round for certain.
Ian Williams there, right where the action is. Thanks for taking us through all of it. Absolutely fascinating. The first week of the competition, and this the second week as we get into the knockout stages. We're going to take a short break. We'll have all the latest on our main stories, including that Culture Secretary announcement about the long-term funding of the BBC here in just a moment or two. Don't go away.